When I was starting in competitive Pokemon and first started to get into the older generations, GSC was seen as the peak of skill, the most competitive generation. If you were good at GSC, then had to be you had to understand the game at the highest, most fundamental level. So there were always ways of kind of getting around that if you were thrown into GSC or you wanted to play it and you wanted to kind of God, I haven't used this expression in so long, so it's falling out of my head. But if you wanted to get rid of the skill gap, I don't know why that took me so much effort. But yeah, the way that used to manifest itself was with the use of explosion teams, which were the defining team style in GSC for so long, not hard stall or anything like that. And they were good against pretty much everything. And with the power of explosion and some decent play, then you could kind of not really BS your way through good players, but you had a pretty good shot, right? Obviously, really good players could take advantage of this and not let you get away with it too easily. But that was generally the idea. And people were complaining for a while that explosion offense was too easy to use and that it was stupid, it wasn't real GSC, all that jazz. Now we know what real GSC is, can be whatever, right? And the metagame evolved because Jinx came in to the subject of this video. Yeah, Jinx came in to completely shut those offense teams down, those boom teams. And then there were other evolutions in the metagame, but oh my god, uh, yeah, offense is still the defining team style in GSC, far and away. Not that stall isn't great, but yeah. So this video is coming from not just the Jinx problem or the Jinx perspective, but that whole idea about GSC being the ultimate test of competitive Pokemon skill. Yeah, that's an opinion that has gone a little more challenged in more recent years. And it mostly comes from a small group of jokesters, funny guys, who have been going around and doing their best to, it sounds ridiculous, but they've been doing their best to make sure everyone knows that GSC is actually a bad tier. It's been referred to by these, I saw the Christmas lights in the reflection of my window over there. And I was like, whoa, is someone else? Oh, no, it's me. As far as I'm concerned, last 4 months of the year, I can use these anytime I want. These folks have been going around making sure everyone knows actually GSC is a coin flip tier, referring to playing it as, oh, I'm going to go flip some coins. Basically, the argument is that it's just an RNG fest. And this is pretty much identical to when, not a few years ago at this point, my God, but a long time ago, last decade, yikes, last decade, there were some players who pretty much did the same exact thing with DPP. And when DPP was first an old generation, it was pretty much, the sun shone out of its ass. People thought it was perfect. Oh yeah, let's play DPP instead of terrible black and white and terrible X, Y, stuff like that. And then it just completely 180'd thanks to the efforts of a select group of players that did not like DPP and made sure everyone knew it. And then these players had a lot of sway, and because it is a very social place, the competitive Pokemon scene. And basically, the same things they were saying were suddenly being repeated by people who had no idea about anything about DPP. For instance, I remember one player who I knew for a fact could probably count the number of games of DPP they'd played on, if not one hand, then two max. And they were going around using the expression DP good, which was like an in joke among the people who really didn't like DPP, they were just calling it, oh, DP good because haha, it's not good, or same kind of person would recycle the I hope my last beats your last kind of thing. Just complete nonsense from people who didn't understand the tier. Now, this is not exactly the same thing that's going on in GSC right now. God, it's GSC drama update, am I right? But yeah, the thing here is that the players who are spreading this, I guess you could call it propaganda about GSC, trying to change its public image, this character assassination, if you like, they are experienced with the tier. They understand it better, which is weird because they use this understanding of the tier to then kind of misunderstand it and just say, oh, it's stupid. It'd be like if you really, really understood everything about what makes, let's say, advance a good tier, and then you went around and said, oh, actually, these things that are good for advance or that are just a part of advance, they are actually bad because of I don't know what reason. I can't personally dive into the psychology that deeply. Well, maybe I could, but not with the level of attention I'm giving it. But yeah, I've seen more and more people start to like repeat the whole thing about, oh, GSC sucks, because not because of the it's all stall reason, because if someone says that, they really don't know what they're talking about. This is more like the inside baseball version of GSC sucks. Oh yeah, man, it's just sleep talk rolls and thunder accuracy and paralysis, which I think is ridiculous, because as if every generation doesn't have absurd amounts of RNG. It's like when someone gets full parrot off a T-Wave and RBY and people go, oh, RBY moment. Like, yeah, that was very specific to RBY, that full para. And just RNG in every generation. And if you think one generation is more RNG heavy than the other, then it's just demonstrably wrong. At least not to any statistically significant effect that I can see. But that's not really the point here. So I also think it's weird when these same people go, it's a perfect tier, Advance OU. That's a perfect tier. And I'm like, really? Now I really think you're willfully not seeing some things, because look, as much as I love Advance, I think it's a great tier. And I don't think you can call it perfect while still ripping on other tiers. Anyway, not the point. Because there are some things about Advance that I personally am not a fan of. So, and I think they should be clear. I mean, I realize I'm getting off on a tangent here, but oh man, it's been a while since I did that. But I think these kinds of things, if you're, put it this way, if you're going to be so critical as to completely, rip a tier to shreds if you don't like something about it, you should extend that same criticism or that same critical eye towards Advance, which definitely has a lot of things that can be ripped on. And then, of course, the conclusion from this is, oh, actually, every tier sucks. And then you realize, oh, it's actually every tier has its own things which are stupid, because that's the game of Pokemon. So then you appreciate each tier more. You see, that's how it generally should go, which is why I think bashing tiers is generally a waste of time. Even my long-standing hatred for Gen 5 OU, that more comes from a place of personal frustration with its mishandling. I think it's actually a fine tier. Well, I think there's plenty of stupid stuff. There's stupid stuff in every tier, so. Yeah, so if there is one thing that these GSC haters have that I think has any validity to it, though, it's Jinx. So, because I've also been frustrated with Jinx's place in the tier at times. I think overall it's completely fine. I don't think I would ban Jinx. I don't think. But what bothers me about Jinx, it's not even a Jinx specific thing. It's kind of another, Pokemon thing in general. The reason why Jinx is frustrating in GSC is not just LOL freeze, because Gengar does the same thing all the time. It's more and Gengar is often paired with it and can be frustrating and stuff like that. But the reason why Jinx can be so frustrating is that it has much more RNG potential to bust past its counters than Gengar, or at least in the way it's played. And that's kind of the issue. It's not even that, it can do RNG stuff, because so can everything, right? The thing is that it really encourages RNG stuff, as in plays that are worse but people go for them because, oh, I might get a crit, and oh, it might work. That kind of mentality, which is also a shift. People. I remember a time, because I'm a million years old. I know. I remember a time where people's first instinct was not to go for the luck move. Now, obviously, look, I'm not saying you shouldn't go for the luck move if that's your best move. Of course, you should. And people have gotten more and more aware that sometimes, yes, you do have to go for the RNG. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is when you kind of use this awareness as a shortcut. Suddenly people think they're geniuses for identifying that, oh, if I get a crit here, it's actually really good for me. So let me go for the crit, even when they have much better moves. That is also much more common. So the problem with competitive Pokemon is that it has a lot of nonsense, right? And yeah, it's subjective. Okay, I get your point. I understand. I've heard it before. The problem with this nonsense is that you can make the worst move and still be rewarded for it. And this is what Jinx enables a lot. Another example, Ironhead Jirachi in DPP. You've seen it a million times, or I've seen it a million times. Not that Jirachi has BS something with Ironhead, because obviously everyone's seen that. But what I've seen in so many tournament games is where someone has a better move. Like I've seen one player in particular, I won't name, who had this habit. Every time Jirachi was out on a Heatran, they would have like 4 Heatran counters at full health, and they would need the Jirachi. And they would, uh, rather than switch out, they would just stay in and go for a Body Slam para or an Ironhead flinch. They didn't need to, they just did. Actually, I remember another player who did that too. Point being, it was a worse move, but they were rewarded for it, to varying degrees. They generally didn't wind up flinching out the Heatran, but they definitely did a lot more stupid stuff to it than they should have, because they were thinking, oh, I have the RNG going for me, so what's the issue? Um, yeah, that kind of stuff is what you try to limit, because you want to limit the avenues the worst player has to cheese the better player out of the game. That's why we get rid of things like baton pass, stuff we know. So with Jinx, it kind of encourages the same thing, in that with the standard sub Jinx set, I think Nightmare is a lot better. It's a lot more consistent, but people like sub. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Problem is, most teams are going to have Jinx checks. And these Jinx checks are things you can wear down normally through spikes, teammates, Gengar explosion, whatever, things like that, right? But the problem is, people see the possibility for an Ice Beam freeze or a Psychic Spit F drop. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with going for those if you're really playing for them. If all it takes is one freeze and your opponent gives you 16 opportunities, go for it, right? So assuming they don't fall out, of course. But it shouldn't really be your first response, basically. So the problem is that it has become a lot of people's first response because it's easy. Because you can just say, oh, you know what? I'll just go for it. I'll click Ice Beam a few times and Psychic, and suddenly Jinx has these matchups where the only ways it wins against bulky things like Snorlax or Raikou or whatever is through repeated instances of hacks, and people go for it more and more. And the more you go for it, obviously the higher the odds. So you kind of see the issue in that it's lucky, but it's not even that unlucky if you just make such a conscious effort to go for it over and over. But at the same time, the percentages are still really not that high. This is another thing that's kind of become more popular in more recent years. I don't even know how to describe, the time period I'm thinking of, which is like the mid 2010s, a decade ago. Oh my God. But yeah, where people would luck someone out of a win and say, oh, sorry, well, I had odds. Well, of course you had odds. It wasn't 0%. Just because you recognize that you had a 10% chance to win if you got a T-Bolt para doesn't mean that, it's like, oh, well, the odds were there. They weren't terrible. And then you get into this whole nonsense. Oh, look, he played to his odds. What a smart player. And it's like, what about the other player who played to a 90% win? And then it becomes very results based, which is a problem that the Pokemon world has in general. But yeah, So that's where the dilemma with the Jinx thing comes in, because it is kind of frustrating. On what, because that's the other thing, like when you have Nightmare Jinx or Thief Jinx, I think that you don't even need to. When I was spamming the daylights out of Jinx, I never really needed to go for ice beams and psychic drops. Like obviously sometimes yes you go for them, but it's not your first mode of play, because with Nightmare for example you punish sleeping Pokemon, not just the thing you lovely kissed, but the thing that you forced into rest. Suddenly, that resting Pokemon is trapped in a Nightmare. Suddenly, Thief has opened up so many avenues for damage for not just Jinx, but its teammates. You know, you Thief whatever, and like Thief a Snorlax. Oh, look at that. Zapdos just got so much scarier. For instance, these are not RNG influenced styles of play. So when you have the Jinx just going, like subbing up to try and psychic drop your way through Snorlax is ridiculous, because there are better ways to deal with Snorlax, and if you don't have a better way of dealing with Snorlax, then your team is bad. Or Raikou or whatever it is, T-Tar. So yeah, it's more the issue that it encourages stupid play or worse play. It's not, I guess, not dissimilarly. A few months ago, I made that video about Machamp and DPP, where sadly didn't go anywhere. But it's the same kind of play where I didn't even put that together until now. Yeah, where you'll just have Machamp clicking Dynamic Punch because, oh well, you know what? I might confuse it, and people go, oh well, you know RNG. It's like, well, the RNG is too high in that case. That was the problem with Machamp. With Jinx, it's not even that the RNG is too high, because even it's not even like if you get one psychic drop that you're suddenly beating Snorlax. It's the psychic drop, and then it's the crit, and then it's the other drop. And I think players saw, some players using Jinx and getting a lot of luck with it, and then suddenly going, hey, that Jinx thing's really got a lot of things going for it. And it's like, yeah, the player got a lot of luck with it. So I don't know. This is partially, player perception being stupid. But then you have players who will go really far in tournaments. There was a specific instance a few years ago, and yeah, it was a player basically just spamming freeze nonsense en route to winning GSC Cup, which was funny because then the player was all, oh well, GSC sucks because I just spam freeze without knowing what I'm doing. And then the other player was like, yes, you have demonstrated repeatedly throughout this tournament that you don't know what you're doing, which was hilarious. Anyway, I forget the exact details of what happened, but yeah, so the fact that it encourages, I mean, yeah, basically without the reason why Jinx is getting singled out here is because, yes, in every generation you can figure out a way to try and BS your way through whatever. Like in Advance with Jirachi Fire Punch, like, how many times I've seen someone just say, LOL, I'm going to try and burn this T-Tar with Jirachi's Fire Punch and get bailed, that kind of thing, where the RNG is too impactful, not even that high percentage, but, you just need one, and then suddenly you're walking on eggshells trying to avoid it, and then you become easier to play around. It's a whole ugly thing. So I don't even know if there's an issue per se, but I wanted to mention it anyway because it does speak to the greater problem of of it not being that difficult to BS your way through. I mean, most people associate this with cheese, right? Like, oh, I'm playing someone better than me. Let me bring Baton Pass, before that was banned. Now would be more, let me bring, a bunch of setup sweepers and hope one of them clicks the setup move and wins in the spot, right? Here, it's more like, oh, let me just click the RNG button. And again, it can be very skillful to go for RNG, of course. But when it becomes the default, then, because like, let's say RBY freezing, because if you freeze something in RBY, then that's a KO, right? But in GSC, it's not even a guaranteed, KO on something. Or, half the time it's not even Ice Beam. It's just let me click Psychic on this thing and hope I get multiple Spit F drops. And, half the time they're just going to switch out. So, yeah, it does feel like the worst of the... You don't want to enable button mashing, and you can extend this to Jirachi ironheading its way through stuff it has no business ironheading its way through. It's not even like it's a last resort, because then it's like, well, what else are you going to do? No, it's like when players' first options are, you know what, I'm just going to try and RNG my way through it, and then they get rewarded for it. When really they had better ways of dealing with it. So yeah, I think that's basically it. And yeah, Jinx is a pain, but I don't think it's anything too horrible. It's more the frustration of when the other player says, "You know what? I'm going for that RNG," and then you are pretty much just left at the mercy of hoping you don't get the RNG that they shouldn't be going for, but are anyway, and they decide, "You know what? Well, I'm going to go for it." And yeah, most of the time, statistically anyway, you will be fine. But in a tournament setting, you can't just it can be the worst thing to just lose to someone who decided that day was their day to click the buttons and the game was like, you know what? You made the worst moves. Here's your win. So, yeah, I mean, this is also ties into a lot of my complaints kind of tie into each other, which is also that I wish we had better tournament formats, like double elimination, best of three in tournaments that don't have best of three, things like that. All about increasing player skill, right? So, yeah, now, as for GSC's reputation, I don't think it's getting really butchered or anything like that. I think most people are just like, yeah, yeah, okay, whatever you say about the coin flipping part. But it does make me sad to see, because I think it's an amazing tier. But I like about it specifically, what so many others did that gave its reputation in the first place. If you're gonna win in this tier, you have to really be good. You really have to know what's going on. You do not BS your way to success in this tier, without really understanding it, just because you mash the buttons. And then Jinx, basically, because I don't think this really exists if Jinx isn't around. I don't think you can really do it with Gengar and Nidoking going for freezes. Uh, Jinx kind of has become that thing. So that's why I like GSC. There's so much control over pretty much everything that well, I guess it also kills me that some players in GSC now, they're willing to match up fish. In the tier, you need to match up fish less than anything else. Like, oh, I'm going to just pray they don't use insert whatever the hell here, in a tier that's so small. I mean, yeah, this old man yells at Cloud, I know. But not really. I think I really enjoy when someone like brings a stupid team and gets burned, or when someone like clicks a stupid button and gets burned, and then goes, "Oh well, I guess that didn't work out." It's like, well, of course it didn't work out. You did something stupid. You act like it's a surprise. Um, yeah, lost in the sauce. It's an epidemic of. I don't know if it's. I made that video about bored mainer syndrome (BMS), where people are just playing the tier their chosen tier too much and they're sick of the regular option, so they start bringing stuff that's worse just to mix it up, and then they're worse off for it. It's like, oh, I wonder why this team with a bad Pokemon didn't do so well. Yeah, shocker. Who could have seen that coming? And I think it might have to do with the moves too. I've seen the most seasoned GSC player in the world, in tournament settings, sometimes just stay in with Skarmory on Zapdos just because, I don't know, I think he just got bored of switching Skarmory out of Zapdos for the 6 millionth time. It's like, why on earth would you do that? Was just one example. But like stupid moves like that, just LOL, I don't know, let's see what happens. So, because I personally like the control of GSC. I like that you're not going to get BS'd by random stupid stuff. I like that if you bring a good team and you play well, you will be rewarded for it. And then half the GSC player base doesn't even like the tier anymore, and it's like, well, what are you doing then? And they don't like it for strange reasons that aren't really accurate. The Jinx thing I get, but anyway, I'm starting to talk in circles there, so that is my sign to cut things off. If I were a younger man, then my blood would be boiling over this. Kind of like it did when the DPP was getting its good name slandered. Nowadays, though, it's more like the slight irritation of cutting yourself while shaving, because that happened to me this evening. It was very mild. I didn't even feel it, and it's not too bad a scratch. I'm getting better. Um, yeah. So, but I did want to make this thing. So that I believe is everything. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.